From May of '89, my first album in Los Angeles was actually a blues album with Willie Dixon, and which is just so amazing to get to work with him on this small film called Ginger Ale Afternoon. But that was very special. And then also that summer, I did my first album with Alan Silvestri, The Abyss, and then it was for that fall. The releases of that fall were more kind of business as usual for Varese in terms of releasing things that were part of franchises that Varese had already been connected with. So there was the latest Halloween movie, Halloween 5. I worked on that. And then the latest Nightmare on Elm Street, Nightmare on Elm Street 5, things like that. But just a month or two after that, then the next stage really started opening up, because I had the opportunity of I worked with Elmer Bernstein for the first time on a little film that nobody expected anything from, My Left Foot. And then also at the same time, I got through a music supervisor who was involved in Halloween, the Halloween 5, who also was connected into the Driving Miss Daisy project, and was able to give my name to Lily Zanuck when she was looking for a label to find for Driving Miss Daisy, and had been turned down by all the major labels at the time. And she had a screening. She showed me the film, and I loved it. And she was kind of explaining who Hans Zimmer was, because this was only his second American score. Only Rain Man preceded Daisy, and because also the film was directed by Bruce Beresford, and he had a strong relationship and friendship with Georges Delerue. So my initial thought too was, well, why wasn't Georges on this movie? But it was actually, Barry who recommended Hans to the Zanucks, and that's what brought Hans in. But I loved what Hans did, and it's such a special score. And so that connected Hans and I at the very beginning of his career, or of his career in America. He had done he had been in London and before that with doing work with Stanley Myers, and what breeds success but success in Hollywood. And so that set the stage for my next summer, where I worked on 7 of the top 11 movies of the summer, with Back to the Future 3, Die Hard 2, and Gremlins 2, and Presumed Innocent, John Williams score, RoboCop 2 with Leonard Rosenman, and then everything just completely exploded after that. And so there was never a time, right from the very beginning of starting to work in Los Angeles, I was doing 50 plus albums a year. That actually rose to a high of 73 in 1993. It was a case of wanting to stand by and support the composers I really believed in, and the scores that I really believed in, because I really looked at things in a big picture sort of approach. It's like if you want to just focus in on trying to pick the movies that are absolutely going to be hits, nobody can do that. The studios can't do that. And so that, that's never been anything but a wrong-headed approach as far as I'm concerned.
And honestly, if that was your focus, then the people you need to be working with, composers and those relationships that are important for being able to let your career to be able to move forward, if they start to catch wind that you're really only interested in the big hitters and you're not really interested in them and their music, that relationship's not going to be authentic. It's not going to be at a level that they trust you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really became very clear to me, and with many of the composers actually verbalizing it in so many words, saying how much they appreciated the support, which they weren't receiving from, frankly, other labels at the time. That they, I mean, even, you know, looking back, it means so much to me that Jerry Goldsmith, for the last 20 years of his career, he knew that all he had to do was pick up the phone, and anything he had that he wanted me involved in, I was there for him. And, you know, and other composers.
Speaking of Jerry, I know you've mentioned him a few times already in this show, but you also, from the years we've known each other, you know, I've been able to really see you brought up Jerry a lot, and you had a very strong connection with him. So, you know, speak a little bit about how important to you, not just professionally, but personally, that relationship with Jerry was, what that meant to you.
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, he meant so much to me. Certainly as a role model, as an inspiration for what I did, and allowing me to kind of really run with my passion, you know, for all of this. I definitely felt, you know, supported and encouraged by Jerry, as he was the first composer that I really worked closely with. I got to know him in such a way where I recognized the shared passions we had. For example, and principally, a passion for the music of Alex North. And so even though in the entire scope and history of Jerry Goldsmith's career, he had never conducted an album of another composer's music ever, I proposed to Alex North when I was visiting him at his home in Pacific Palisades, when we first started talking about doing a new series of recordings of his classic scores, Spartacus and Viva Zapata and 2001: A Space Odyssey. I dared to bring up that score that everybody knew to never bring up in the presence of Alex North, because it was such a painful memory for him. But I actually did bring it up. Alex was too old and frail at the time to be able to conduct himself. And so when we were putting together the 2001 project, there was this incredible kind of morning where Alex and I were downstairs in his studio waiting for Anna, his wife, to get lunch ready for us upstairs. And he went, you know, behind the piano and pulled out a stack of his 2001 manuscripts and brought them over to me, wrapped in brown paper, put them in my hands with his blessing to do a recording. And I go back to my office that day with like the 2001 manuscripts. They almost vibrated. I mean, the energy, I mean, I couldn't believe what was in my hand. You know, nobody had heard this music ever. But when Alex and I were talking about it, and he said, well, who should conduct? And I was just about to say, what about Jerry Goldsmith? But then he interrupted and answered his own question. He said, you know, Lenny Bernstein owes me a favor. But looking back, the time period that this was, you know, there was only like a few weeks in time between when Bernstein announced his retirement and then when he died suddenly. Mm-hmm. And this meeting between Alex and I happened in that middle period. So I told Alex that I believed that Lenny wasn't doing particularly well and was having some health issues. And Alex he said, oh dear, I'm so sorry to hear that. And then I brought up what about Jerry Goldsmith? And even though I'd never even proposed it to Jerry, I hadn't even talked to Jerry about this yet, because, you know, this is just all happening in real time. but Alex, he beamed. His face lit up. He said, "Ah, absolutely. Jerry and I are good old buddies." And so then that afternoon, I go back to the office and realize I have to figure out a way of telling Jerry what I had already volunteered him for. And so I get him on the phone, and we start talking through it, and he can tell where the conversation is going. And bless his heart, he interrupts me and he says, "Absolutely, it would be an honor." And so then this was the first of my re-recording series with Jerry Goldsmith conducting, and Jerry and I ultimately did 5 of Alex's scores. The next, after 2001, we did A Streetcar Named Desire, and then Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and Viva Zapata, and The Agony and the Ecstasy. And it was actually while we were in Scotland recording The Agony and the Ecstasy that Gramophone magazine did interviews with Jerry and I to talk about that particular recording and other upcoming projects. And they asked Jerry, which other of Alex North's scores do you hope to record? And his answer was just so heartfelt and genuine. He said, all of them. Jerry and I did over 80 albums together, over the course of all the years. There was never a time when he and I weren't working on something new between The Final Conflict and Looney Tunes Back in Action, which was his final score. There was never a time when we weren't working on something new, and almost always we had a whole sequence of a series of projects, multiple projects going of different types at any one time, new scores and new recordings, and we were doing concerts together as well, and so there was a big pile of things we just never got to. And
you mentioned being in Scotland, and I know you did a lot with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, right? That's how these recordings were done. How did that come to be? And that was an extensive relationship too with that orchestra. How did that come to be?
Yeah, 40 albums. Everything big.
Just a few.
Yeah. That came about. The first of those kind of recording projects I did was when we did 2001. It was in London. We recorded at Abbey Road Studios. We had a 105-piece symphony orchestra, 3 sets of timpani, 5 organs. I mean, just crazy. And then we also did in 95, we did, so that was 1993, we recorded the 2001 score. In 95, we did Streetcar. And, but also at that time in 94, I wanted to start doing other recording projects as well, but didn't have a budget of always going to London and recording at Abbey Road with huge orchestras. So I put together a deal with the Seattle Symphony initially, and took both Joel McNeely and Cliff Eidelman for a few sessions, a few different trips for different album projects with recording with the Seattle Symphony. And that ultimately kind of undid itself. There were some, issues with the orchestra that finally, pushed me to the brink. Coincidentally, at that time, out of the blue, I get a call from Maggie Rodford, Patrick Doyle's agent, and I've been working with Patrick, from the very beginning of his career as well, with his second score for a movie called Dead Again, a Ken Branagh movie. And the RSNO was was planning a concert of Patrick's music. And the general manager brought up with Maggie in their, one of the meetings to plan the upcoming concert, brought up that the orchestra was also interested in doing some film music recording if she had anything that would fall into that world that they could be involved in. What are some recording dates that we could have? And so then he came back with a proposal for a period of time that would allow for the recording of 2 different albums in 1995. And those first two albums with the RSNO became an album called Hollywood 95, which was a collection of great film music from that year, from that summer, predominantly. And then Bernard Herrmann, Vertigo, the complete score from Vertigo with Joel McNeely conducting both of those albums. And then Vertigo went on to receive Gramophone magazine's first ever award for film music, for a classical music award that they had never presented to film music in their entire decades-long history. But they gave a special award for excellence in film music recording to Vertigo in 1995. And for my first recording with the RSNO. So that got off to a great start, set the stage for, okay, well, let's go back and do some more. Yeah. And essentially I started then visiting Glasgow 2 or 3 times a year with a different, usually pair of composers. And I also liked the idea of kind of combining generations where, it would be rewarding to each of the composer conductors by kind of getting to spend time with somebody they wouldn't otherwise get to spend time with and share experiences. And so I actually specifically scheduled Joel McNeely and Jerry Goldsmith together. And I scheduled Cliff Eidelman and Elmer Bernstein together. And I scheduled John Debney and Stu Phillips together. Oh, yeah. And, so by combining these kind of generations of composers, it was while Joel McNeely was there with Jerry Goldsmith that they, kind of started to formulate a connection, a friendship. Prior to that trip, actually, Jerry was originally going to be conducting Patton and the Sand Pebbles on an earlier trip, but then at the last minute got called to score LA Confidential, and really wanted to do the movie. They showed him the movie. He loved it. He really wanted to do it, but we were leaving like just 3 or 4 weeks later for Scotland. And so he called me and explained, he said, I'd really love to do this movie, but I won't hold you up. I know it's too late to cancel the sessions, but if you can find somebody to take my time, give these sessions to them, and then I'll go later. And so anyway, the backup plan and taking over Jerry's vacated sessions for Patton and the Sand Pebbles ended up being Elmer conducting To Kill a Mockingbird, because he was going to be in London, in the UK at the time, at his home in Warwick, England, and was able to just like drive to the sessions. And so we did that, and Cliff Eidelman was also on that trip, and we did the Alien Trilogy album. And but then it was, and then we rescheduled the Goldsmith sessions, Joel McNeely on that trip, and then coming back from that trip, the whole Air Force One saga was kind of blowing up at the time, and Jerry was asked to score the movie, but they had no time at all. It was just crazy how it was not possible for Jerry to physically write the number of minutes of music they would need. And it was brought up that, well, could he work with another composer? And his initial thought was, absolutely not. I don't work with other composers. But then in not dismissing the idea completely out of hand, then the concept of, is there anybody you would consider working with to help you kind of get across the finish line in the time you have to make this possible? And then ultimately the idea was, what about Joel McNeely? And Jerry agreed. And so Joel became the assistant additional music composer on Air Force One, thanks to developing the relationship with Jerry in Scotland when they were doing shared RSNO projects.
Wow. People
have no idea how many things are connected.
Well, I mean, even even something like the connection of us doing the concerts in 2013, you happened to come to a concert that we did as a tribute, if I'm not mistaken, to Jerry Goldsmith. And Carol Goldsmith was there, and you're there. And as you were walking out of the reception, I was walking in, and for like 2 seconds, we met each other, and you were leaving. And then, what was it, weeks later or something, you said you were on a flight, realizing there was an anniversary coming up, and you send me, as you get off the plane, a Facebook message. What do you think about doing the anniversary concert? And that's where it started from. It was like that concert having to happen. You happened to come because of what the theme of the concert was, which obviously with your relationship with Jerry makes sense, but that led to something that neither of us would have ever been thinking about prior to that.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. It was, and it wasn't even at the concert itself that we met. I think you were like on your way into the after party.
Right.
And, and I had to, get back to LA because who knows how many, probably had a session the next morning or whatnot. But I just, and it was just a quick hello, 2 minutes of, Steven, congratulations on the concert, bravo, just wanted to say hi. And that was, that was the extent of it. Because I had just seen you, you were kind of mind, and, came to mind, and I sent you the note saying, just feeling you out on this, would there be any interest at all of, collaborating and doing something together to celebrate the Varese 35th anniversary? And, I think I heard back from you in, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Your, I think, jaw was on the floor. It's like, wait, what?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was funny because when we met at that after party, it was later that evening when early morning, when everything was done with that concert, and I was kind of reflecting on the concert, reflecting on the evening, and thinking about what had happened that night. Then it kind of hit me, wait a minute, in that quick passing, I just met and shook hands with a guy that I've been reading his liner notes for I don't know how many years to albums he's created. But again, I'm going, wow, that's a great moment. I mean, that's a memory I'm always going to remember. Little did I know that a handful of weeks later, was you want to work together on these concerts, and it just made that moment now, as you've been saying, it's like those moments, the what people like to call luck, but there's a lot of preparation and opportunity and being prepared for the moment that comes into play.
Yeah, it's the preparations for the moments that seem to drop from the sky, that don't drop from the sky.
Right.
Everything in our lives add up to allowing these moments to happen.
Yeah. We're talking about a lot of albums here. We're also talking about concerts. Looking at the albums for a second, I'm sure that there are some people that are going to watch this that would just, the quick elevator speech version of what exactly is the process like when there's a film that's been made, there's music that's being written for it, and there's going to be an album that's going to come out. What's that process like for you of making that album a reality? What's that look like to be a producer of that to somebody who'd have no idea?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, certainly. Now, of my album projects, there's generally like two different categories. There's what you just described, and then there's the separate projects that are complete standalone recording projects, things that are just recorded for album. When looking at all of the original motion picture soundtracks that I produced over the years, generally it would begin with, again, just so many relationships. I mean, my personal relationships did not just involve composers, but they were with studio music department heads and studio legal department heads. So, relationships with the lawyers, relationships with the music supervisors and department heads and whatnot, and then the composers themselves and agents and whatnot. So you have this kind of whole network of relationships out there that I built over the years. And then kind of working with them, projects could begin really from anyone of, coming, from any direction of people you have relationships with, or be instigated by me. If I hear about a movie or something that I'm not already connected to in some way, I'll reach out to the studio and say, it's Robert Townson from Perez Saraband. We'd love to release the soundtrack to your upcoming film if possible. And then of course all the composer relationships I had. So you could have, composers would reach out to me early on. I mean, obviously, again, particularly was the case with Jerry, where his preference was always that the album be with me, and I remember those kind of periodic movies where he would be that extra bit excited about the score, or really happy with what he was working on, and he would call me early and say, make sure you get the deal in place early on this one. That was the case on Rudy, Total Recall, and Basic Instinct. The night he recorded Basic Instinct in London, Total Recall as well. But the night he got back from London after recording Basic Instinct, he was so excited about that score that he messengered me a DAT to listen to it right away. And, it's a time period where soundtrack albums just by necessity are kind of restricted to 30 minutes due to union rules. And so that means however long the score is, it's got to be pared down. And so that was always a challenge. I remember, first time I had a call from John Williams was after I put together this sequence for Stanley and Iris. And score I love of his. It's so beautiful. And had selected all the cues and the order for them, and then submitted it through his through Gorfain Schwartz, his agents. And I remember, one day getting a call saying, John Williams calling for you, and it was John himself, to say how happy he was with the selection and sequence, and he had not a single change, and let's onward. I'm so hands-on, always was, to the point where not only kind of either sequencing or working with the composer on the final sequence for the album, but package design, what photos. There's definitely a look to the whole era of the albums that I put out, because you have a style, and even working with different kind of art directors who actually built the files and did the assembly work over the years. Or who's going to write liner notes, having a director or producer or writer involved. Or is it more of a historical project where I might write something, or whoever. Perez right from the beginning was probably a smaller company than people imagine, because they see the volume of work coming out, and they think people streaming down hallways and big corporate at the beginning, at Perez, there was me, and I was A&R, the producer, business affairs. I was doing the contracts for studio deals. Chris Kuchler was doing all the kind of infrastructure, dealing with foreign distributors and manufacturing, and all of that side of things. And then there was a shipping guy, and that was the company for for so long.
You talked earlier about how the start of this process, all the relationships that you've developed, and how phone calls could come from anywhere within the industry to get something started. I know how much you love the music. It's obvious. And the whole reason you went into this is because your love for the music. But I think another thing that's obvious, even through this discussion we've been having here, are the composers themselves, who they are to you. It's more than just the machine that's putting out a product that you then get to sell. There's a person behind that. And I didn't know if maybe you had some comments about how important the actual composer is to you and your relationship with them.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, to me, it's all connected. And so it's like, yes, I have, of course, a passion and a drive to preserve and share the music in as kind of a widespread way as possible. You know, the concept behind the albums and the concerts is the same concept. It's me sharing with the world and as many people as possible the music that I'm passionate about, and hopefully allowing them to, you know, I mean, obviously many people sharing that passion just outright, and then introducing others to this great music that. But then, in addition to that, it's you know, I cherish the memories I have with all the composers that we've lost, you know, over the years, because they were such dear and close friends. And I was so lucky to develop these special relationships and friendships with really all of them, and miss them so much, from Alex North and Basil Polidorus and Michael Kamen and George Delarue and Elmer Bernstein and Henry Mancini. You know, I remember Hank would always recognize me. He would see me across the room at a party before I'd even see him, and would, you know, make beeline over to me. He's like, "How you doing?" And you know, and Elmer and I, we did so much work together. And George Delarue, he was like a grandfather, my first, you know, kind of film music ambassador and friend who I, you know, connected with right at the beginning. And just loved him so much. And who knew that time was so short with him, that you know, we lost him in 1992 after his Rich and Love score. Because we worked so closely together on things that we're so passionate about, it really amplifies the importance and the connections between us. And so that allow for things like the you know, the concerts we've done together and that I've done around the world, where I can call up Hans Zimmer or send him a note and say, Perez Sarabande 35th anniversary concert, May 11, May 10, or I forget, whatever the date was. Would you be available, Hans? I'd love to have you part of it if you could be. I heard back from Hans, and even quicker than I heard back from you. and he wrote to me. He says, "Robert, my schedule is insane. I have no time for anything, but I would not miss your night. I'll be there."
And I've got to tell you, I remember being in my dressing room, and as I turned to walk out of the dressing room before we were getting ready to do the dress rehearsal, you were in the dressing room across the hall. I think it was the men's orchestra dressing room, and you yell, Steve, I'd like you to meet somebody." And I turn and I walk in, and you say, "Meet Hans Zimmer." And he was standing there with his entourage behind him, who they had their sheet music, all of their things. And he puts his hand out. He goes, "Nice to meet you. And now I'm going to ruin your day." Like,
yeah,
okay. And he said, "Remember how we were going to do that open solo section in the middle of Driving Miss Daisy?" "Yes. Well, now we'd like to insert the theme from Man of Steel." And I remember as we were as we're talking, and he's saying how we're going to make this work, it became, we don't need to give anybody any sheet music. We're going to show them this chord progression. They're going to vamp on it. We're going to kind of just tell them what to play. One of his assistants or interns, who, whatever, they were standing behind him with a huge stack of music. As he says, "We're not even going to need music." You can see this person's face. What?
Yeah.
Yeah. This music.
he had just come up with that idea the night before, and he started calling me at like 3 a.m. Now, normally I'm up all night working on things, of course, but that I'm hosting the concert the next night. Right. So I was asleep already. And so when I wake up, I've got like 10 messages from Hans until finally he gave up. And then we just found out when he came in.
Thank you for watching. For more great videos, subscribe to the Maestro Fox YouTube channel. To learn more about the Maestro, visit StevenAllenFox.com.